Three, two, one, ignition.
핵미치광이들은 그 무엇으로서도 우리의 핵 타격을 막아낼 수 없다는 것을 똑똑히 알아야 한다.
Hitting a bullet with another bullet is how U.S. officials describe shooting down an intercontinental ballistic missile with a long-range interceptor missile. And that's exactly what they did last week, with success in what was widely seen as U.S. ability to counter North Korean missile launches. The focus on missile defense has intensified in the U.S. in the wake of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's unwavering efforts to field an intercontinental ballistic missile to deliver a warhead to U.S. territory. Now, although they have been unsuccessful, Pentagon officials fear that it's only a matter of time before they get it right. Exactly how far along is North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities? And do we, South Korea and the U.S., have enough time to, one, build a missile shield reliable enough to defend a nation from Pyongyang threats, or two, finally and irreversibly curb North Korea's WMD ambitions? It's a topic of our discussion today on Peninsula 24. Let's get it rolling. Dr. Song Seong-jong to my left, a professor of military science at Daejeon University. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, to my right, as always, Dr. Chang-su. Dr. Kim, good to see you again this week.
Good to see you again.
So let's talk about, was it earlier last week that the Pentagon put up its defense system against an ICBM for the first time? So what are you two reading into this so-called test? I mean, is there an underlying message that came with this high-profile dry run?
To my best knowledge, this is the first ever live test, the intercept, the missile test that was successful. I think that it has two messages. One is that the warning against North Korea, which means that they have a credible and reliable anti-missile system that can intercept the fired by the North Korea. But on the other hand, to the United States citizens and the people of the U.S. allies, that they have a dependable and reliable and workable anti-missile system. I think that this time around, the simulated ICBM class of warhead was fired from the Marshall Island, and it was successfully intercepted by the missile they launched from the Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. I think it was the first time ever hit-to-kill technology was proved in reality.
Yeah, I agree that because North Korea has threatened to develop the ICBM capability anytime soon. So as a reaction from the United States, United States has been very forthcoming to show us with convincing evidence that we are going to counter all these ICBMs, possible ICBMs from North Korea. So this is one of the latest developments that how advanced United States is in terms of ABM capability. because it's a very difficult test. And as a matter of fact, they actually did the 3 similar tests alone this year prior to this one. The last one, a successful one, it was using exo-atmospheric kill vehicle. It was a kinetic strike, and it just blew the warheads. So this is a tremendous advancement on the part of the United States. Definitely no question that it shows a tremendous important message to Pyongyang that we are ready to effectively accept any missile you can fire against us.
Correct. So this is obviously sending a message to North Korea, but at the same time, it's a reflection that the United States truly believes and considers North Korea's threat as a real and present threat. What is your assessment of the North missile and nuclear technology as of now? Do they have the technology to mount a nuclear warhead on an ICBM that will reach the United States?
Well, as you briefly mentioned, the Secretary Mattis at the venue of the Shangri-La Security Dialogue, he talked about the present and clear threat from North Korea. I think that he is pointing out the fact that the North Korea is inching closer to perforating the ICBM capability tipped with nuclear warhead. Which means that if North Korea is successfully launching the solid fuel missiles, that means that the United States will not be able to have much warning time. As you know, that the anti-missile system is dependent upon the early detection from the satellite in the space. I think the solid fuel missiles can be launched within a matter of minutes, which means that the United States will have a difficult in detecting that kind of sign.
Yeah, many experts believe that last year in January, North Korea did a 4th nuclear test, and many people believe it is a real game changer. And they did another the 5th nuclear test in November last year. But this year, North Korea said we are almost entering the final stage of preparing for the ICBMs that can hit any targets in the United States. This really was a shocking news to Mr. Trump. So he made all kinds of preparation to counter all these incoming threats from North Korea. So it is a present and clear danger from North Korea. And there's no question about it. I believe there is an international consensus about the gravity of this ICBM capability, even though they have not reached yet. If you look at many experts, they have come up with different assessments of the capability as of now. Many people tend to believe, okay, depending on the worst case scenario, we have to rely on the North Korean self-proclamation that they are about to reach that kind of stage for defense purposes. But more realistic people are skeptical about the capability of North Korea's missile nuclear capability.
Right, some believe it's overplayed.
Overplayed and too much emphasized for domestic reasons, primarily for domestic reasons in North Korea. But I think if you are it doesn't take a rocket scientist to believe they have reached a certain stage far better than they did 2 or 3 years ago.
Sure. And also, I suppose it's really best to prepare for the worst. So we should really, work under the presumption that North Korea has reached a certain level of advancement in its missile and nuclear capability. Now, Dr. Kim, we discussed this last week as well, but we saw Pyongyang test fire missiles of various ranges for the first 3 straight weeks since Moon Jae-in administration launched last month. In fact, they just launched the 9th one of this year alone, and that just added to the dozens of short and long-range missiles that it conducted since the start of last year. Although none of them have really been called successful, we know that we should remember that each and every test feeds into the development of its ultimately ICBM technology. Would you agree with that?
I think that this time around we have to think about how they are firing missiles. Basically, in the past, they fired short-range missiles rather than longer-range missiles in the past. But curiously speaking, these days they are firing longer-range missiles, less dependable. But I think that their intention is to demonstrating their capability to really attack the U.S. troops, not only in Korea, but also in Japan and Guam and Hawaii as well. Therefore, as you know, the Kim Jong-un doesn't seem to be afraid of failing in public, but they keep pushing the envelope, and so that they can make a significant breakthrough in terms of technology and their capability of striking U.S. troops near and far.
I agree with Professor Song, because North Korea has shown its capability, not firing ICBM right now, but before reaching that kind of state, they have to show their kind of ability to fire SCBM, for example, from submarine, and also IRBMs. And as I mentioned, interestingly enough, they began to fire a shorter missile range, Scud-B missiles, Scud-ER missiles. That will primarily target the U.S. bases in Japan and in Hawaii, rather than continental United States. I think this is a message from Pyongyang, because it is still, they have a long ways to go to perfect that kind of ICBM capability, because it's not an easy technology, it's a very difficult technology, and all kind of materials should be continue to be employed from abroad. Otherwise, North Korea cannot perfect that kind of stability without that kind of very important missiles from foreign countries, including China. So I think rather than showing that kind of ICBM capability right now, which is still a long way to go for Pyongyang, they need to improve that. We are heading that way, but for the moment, we are going to update our IBM, SCBM capability that can neutralize Koreans, for example, KAMD and kill change capability. So that is a dual message to Korea and the United States. To the United States, we are also considering your concern about development of ICBM that are directly targets in the United States, but also to Japan and Korea. But we can, stop dispatching all kind of, reinforcement if there is a contingent on the current war. So this is a dual message, multiple message, one for Korea, one for Japan, and also for the United States. So, taken all together, North Korea has, of course, has advanced its capability. But as they said, miniaturization, diversification, or mobilization, and standardization, that is, they can have the capability to mass produce all these missiles. That means for the last particularly 2 years, North Korea has obtained a lot of technical capability. No question about that, but still a long way to go. But they also want, this is not the final goal, even though they claim that we are going to, we are not going to abandon our ballistic missile capability as a safeguard for our own regime in the country. But also, on the other hand, if you look at the other side of the coin, they are actually sending a message. We are going to arrive at that kind of stage, but we also want a kind of negotiation with the United States. Because if the United States wants to stop kind of hostile policy toward the Republic, they said, then we are going to consider some other options as well. So according to them, they also send all the negotiation card on the table.
Right, right. And they're advancing their missiles and nuclear technology in order to have the upper hand and play the card, if you will, when the time comes. Now, while the Pentagon, so let's talk about the U.S. technology and the world, the international community's technology. While the Pentagon is calling the test that they conducted earlier last week a success, some experts have cautioned that this $40 billion missile defense system still has a long way to go before it can be considered fully developed. Now, in fact, some point out that as much as it marks 2 successes in a row, it's only been 2 out of 5, which means, what is it, a 40% success rate, which is not a passing grade, if you will, right? Does the U.S., does South Korea, does the rest of the world have advanced enough technology to deter North Korean threats?
Well, as you pointed out, 40% is not a grade with flying colors. It's a long way to go. I think that this time around, it is a significant milestone for the Missile Defense Agency. I totally agree with that. However, as we agree, in order to have the satisfactory grade, for example, at least 60, 70, or 80% might be a ultimate goal for us. As you know, the anti-missile system is very vulnerable to decoy. With the advanced technology today, it is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish between the decoy and the real the warhead. Therefore, that's the gap we have to fill very soon. But I think that the fundamental problem of that kind of interceptor is that they have had to trade between the speed and the weight, which means that they had to take out the explosive vehicle from the warhead in order to increase the speed, which means that you don't have a blast effect. The only way to neutralize the oncoming missile is to hit the bullet with the bullet.
Right.
Yeah, that is extremely difficult. In order to do so, you have to have a extremely high level of precision. That's a matter of technology. But I think that in that perspective, we have a long way to go.
Right, which is why we have this rising proposal that we should perhaps use cyber capabilities. And so there's also strong belief that the U.S. has been trying to degrade North Korea's missile capabilities via hacking. So, cyber hacking. And it's also based on the belief that the only reliable method to deter North Korean threat is either a preemptive strike, so military strike, or this disabling enemy ballistic missiles through cyber capability. Now, how plausible is this?
I think it's technically plausible, and it's a very interesting story that, for example, the New York Times released a report that somehow there was some cyber espionage conducted by the United States, somewhere in the United States, to neutralize North Korea from bullets missiles from the launching pad. I think theoretically possible because the United States has a tremendous cutting-edge technology in space, in missiles, and that is not just a fantasy. I think they are working toward that kind of direction. If you look at President Obama, it is not Mr. Trump. Actually, many years back, Mr. Obama actually ordered that kind of study, that how we are going to effectively deter nuclear missiles from successful attacks on the United States. So that is so-called the left of the launch. That is, if you look at a kind of line on the time of T1, T, and T2, you have a time here, the launch. And to the left means prior to the launch. So the most important one is not to intercept the missiles that have been fired toward the United States, but rather it is to prevent them from even firing that kind of missile in the first place. So that is what they call the left of the launch. So you have the theoretically right of the launch and left of the launch. So this is a new capability that has been conceptualized and designed by many security experts, military experts in the United States for many years. It's not just in reason. So it's quite possible, theoretically possible. But I talked to many, American government officials. They still kept a kind of NCND policy because once it is released, that is okay. We have this kind of capability. This goes to give a tremendous impetus to Pyongyang to develop outer capability to counter that. Sure. So this is a very complicated issue. So this is NCND policy's best policy. So assuming that United States has maybe reached that kind of stage of developing this kind of capability to neutralize North Korean missiles.
Well, as much as we'd like to believe that left of the launch is what we're aiming for, the best would be actually left of the launch. Okay. So really curbing North Korea's nuclear problem before they could even try to launch anything and really negotiate with them or sanction them or pressure them or dialogue with them so that they will stop this altogether.
Exactly.
Obviously, it's not working as of now because following last week's ballistic missile test, the 9th of its kind this year, the United Nations Security Council slapped it with sanctions once again. It extended a travel ban and asset freeze on high-level North Korean officials and state entities that deal with this program. Now, how effective will this 7th UNSC sanctions be? I mean, North Korea just earlier this week rejected South Korea's civic aid of malaria aid, citing this South Korea's position in the UNSC sanctions.
I think, and how you're going to assess the effectiveness of the sanctions that have been introduced for the last several years, depending on what kind of, by what standard. Okay. If you take one standard, if you have a lower expectation of the UN Security Council resolutions, they believe, oh, this has been a very successful and effective, measures against North Korean programs. But one thing for sure is also political reasons. China has also joined us in pressing North Korea to stop this kind of missile and nuclear activities. That is a much bigger, much important message than just purely technically involving this kind of sanctions worldwide. I think so. It has effective, and it's taken effective measures so far, and we still have a long way to go. But slowly, North Korea is feeling some kind of squeeze because it is not just the United States, Japan, and Korea, but increasing some other countries, China and Russia, to put pressure on abandoning and stop, at least slowing down the speed with which they develop this kind of missile and nuclear capability. So in that sense, this has been successful, and nominating specific persons on the embargo and specific kind of firms in the third countries, including China, is a very effective way of, putting pressure on the Pyongyang leadership. No question about that.
I think Dr. Kim, as always, seems to be very optimistic in terms of sanctions against I'm not, honestly speaking, I'm not a big fan of sanction regime against North Korea. For me, it's like going through the motions, frankly speaking, in terms of, we have to stick to the fundamentals, the purpose of the sanction. What is the purpose of sanction? To change the behavior of the perpetrator. To what extent have we been successful in that regard?
Not very successful.
Well, I think that is a matter of subjective the evaluation and judgment. But I think that the key factor still remains China. I think this time around, UN is poised to pass another round of Security Council resolution, which will be reported as the strongest ever sanction regime. But the authorities related with this issue already commented it is a minimal amount of the penalty that the UN can levy against the United States. It's a minimal approach. And also, China still opposed to the extreme punitive measures such as embargo of the petroleum into the North Korea. But the fact of the matter is that the border trade between China and North Korea is increasing as opposed to decreasing, which means that there are still a lot of loopholes that China is ignoring. And then the boilerplate argument of the China is that if we levy a harsh punishment against North Korea, ordinary citizens will suffer most, as opposed to the military establishment in charge of nuclear and missile the programs. I think that the sanction regime is like peeling the skin of the onion. You remove the skin of the onion,
There's
and
another
on
one,
and
another
on
one.
and on and on. Now here we are.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
this is something that Dr. Kim and we discuss on a weekly basis.
That's right.
Every single time we touch upon the North Korean issue, we end up with the China factor, and that's
Yes.
where we conclude because we can't move it
That's
forward
true.
without China on board, fully on board.
That's right. There are a lot of people different ideas about the effectiveness of sanctions imposed on North Korea. Maybe I'm right. I'm sounding optimistic about the effectiveness of sanctions that have been introduced for the last several years. But increasingly, it is squeezing North Korea to do more actions. Otherwise, they might be much more involved in some other transactions with other countries, including Chinese firms. But cutting off this kind of oil pipes to North Korean population is a serious decision for Chinese leadership. So I think the United States and China they're working on how they're going to encounter these kind of nuclear threats, how they're going to persuade them to stop this kind of missile and nuclear capabilities. I think that in that way, slowly it has been working, and even though we have a long way to go, and we hope we can persuade North American leadership to stop and think otherwise, because they can benefit much more by doing things otherwise than just they have sticking their own policy so far.
I mean, how do we solve a problem like North Korea? Multiple kind of factors such as diplomacy, military tactics, and strategic decisions need to be made in order to really corner North Korea and have them either negotiate with them or pressure them into giving up its North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile programs. So this is something that needs to be talked out on a longer term. And I'm sorry that we only have such a short amount of time, as always. Thank you, Dr. Song, for your insights today.
Pleasure.
And Dr. Kim, as always, thank you. And thank you, as always, for staying with us all throughout. And we will be back next week, because if it's midway through the week, it's Peninsula 24. If you want to find out what's happening in and around the Korean Peninsula, tune into Peninsula 24.